We're giving everyone a substantial raise. Except you. That's what my boss announced right there in front of the whole department. 17 people sitting around that conference table, and he looked directly at me with this smug little smile, like he'd practiced it in the bathroom mirror that morning. Your results just aren't worth it, Jeanette, he said. Maybe next quarter, if you can actually prove your value. I didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't slam my hand on the table. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, and nodded slowly, because I'd learned a long time ago that reacting to cruelty only feeds the person dishing it out. But what happened the very next day at the company-wide luncheon in front of the CEO, the board, and every single person who'd witnessed my humiliation, that changed everything. And my boss? He never recovered. Not professionally. Not personally. Not in any way that mattered. Before we get into it, hitting subscribe and turning on notifications means you'll never miss a story like this one. My name is Jeanette Calloway. I'm 34, and I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, in a house with aluminum siding and a screen door that never quite latched. My mother, Diane, raised me and my 2 younger brothers alone after my father walked out when I was 9. She worked overnight shifts at a packaging plant, then came home and drove a school bus in the mornings. I don't think I saw that woman sleep more than 4 hours straight until I was already in college. Beaumont wasn't the kind of place where people talked about careers in international business. People talked about landing a steady job, keeping the lights on, maybe saving enough to fix the truck's transmission. There's nothing wrong with that. It's honest, it's real. But I always carried this restless feeling in my chest, like I was reaching for something I couldn't quite see yet. I was good with languages. Not just good. The kind of kid who'd overhear someone speaking Vietnamese at the grocery store and go home to teach herself phrases out of library books. By the time I graduated high school, I spoke conversational Spanish and had started teaching myself Korean, because I'd gotten hooked on Korean cinema. Something about the storytelling grabbed me and wouldn't let go. I got a scholarship to UT Austin, studied international business with a minor in East Asian languages, spent a summer in Seoul and came home nearly fluent. After graduation, I bounced through a couple of mid-tier consulting firms, mostly doing translation and cultural liaison work for companies trying to break into Asian markets. Then, 3 years ago, Pinnacle Dynamics hired me, a mid-size industrial supply company out of Houston with a small international division that was basically an afterthought. A handful of European accounts, a couple of Japanese distributors, nothing major. They brought me on as senior account strategist for the Asia-Pacific region, which sounded impressive but really meant I was a one-woman department building something from scratch. And build it I did. My first year, I landed 2 Korean manufacturing clients worth a combined $400,000 in annual contracts. My second year, I expanded into logistics partnerships and added another $600,000. By the start of my third year, the Asia-Pacific division, which hadn't even existed before me, was generating just over $1 million annually, for a company whose total revenue sat around $12 million. I was personally responsible for nearly 9% of the company's entire income, with no assistant, no team, no support. And my boss, a man named Craig Whitford, hated every second of it. Craig Whitford was vice president of business development. 47, tall, prematurely gray in a way he believed made him look distinguished but really just made him look worn out. He'd spent 15 years climbing the ladder at Pinnacle the old-fashioned way, never threatening anyone above him, always taking credit for whoever was below him. Craig didn't understand international markets. He didn't speak a word of anything but English, and honestly his English wasn't much to brag about either. His strength was domestic sales, handshake deals with his golf buddies, long steakhouse lunches where contracts got signed somewhere between the appetizer and the second bourbon. From the moment I was hired, Craig made it clear he considered the international division a vanity project. Our CEO, Patricia Thornton, had pushed for it because she could see where the market was heading. Craig went along with it because he didn't want to fight Patricia, but he resented the whole arrangement and, by extension, he resented me. It started small. He'd forget to loop me into department emails. He'd schedule team meetings for times he knew conflicted with my early morning calls to Seoul, calls that only happened at that hour because of the time difference. When he presented quarterly numbers to the board, he'd fold my revenue into the general business development category, without ever naming the Asia-Pacific division. I brought it up exactly once. walked into his office and calmly suggested the international numbers be broken out separately in the quarterly report so the board could actually see the growth trajectory. He leaned back in his chair. Jeanette, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. These accounts could disappear tomorrow. Korean companies are unpredictable. Let's just keep it under the umbrella for now. Korean companies are unpredictable. That's what he said. I let it go because I had work to do, and sparring with Craig Whitford wasn't going to help my clients or my career. Then came the meeting in March. It was a Tuesday. Craig called a department-wide meeting for 2 in the afternoon. I nearly skipped it. I had a proposal to finish for a new client, but attendance was mandatory. When I walked into the conference room, everyone was already seated. Pastries on the table, little bottles of sparkling water. It had the feel of a celebration. Craig stood at the head of the table with the energy of a man who'd just been handed a microphone at karaoke night. He was practically glowing. I have some exciting news, he said. After a lot of discussion with upper management, we've secured budget approval for a department-wide compensation adjustment. Effective next pay period, every member of the business development team will receive a 20% raise. The room erupted. People clapped. Someone actually said, "Are you serious?" And Craig soaked it in, nodding magnanimously like he was handing out gifts from his own personal fortune. Then he looked at me. Jeanette, I want to be transparent with you. The raise applies to the domestic accounts team. Since the international division is still, let's call it, experimental, we're holding off on compensation changes there until we have a longer performance track record. The room went quiet. Not completely quiet. There was this low murmur, the sound of people being uncomfortable but not quite uncomfortable enough to speak up. I looked around the table. 17 people. Some of them wouldn't meet my eyes. A few looked genuinely embarrassed. One woman, Allison Draper, who handled the Midwest territory, looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Your results just aren't worth it yet, Craig added. And then came that grin, rehearsed, calculated, unkind. I didn't say a word. Just nodded, picked up my pen and notebook and sat through the remaining 40 minutes while Craig walked through next quarter's projections. Projections that, by the way, included the international revenue I generated entirely on my own. After the meeting, Allison caught me in the hallway looking mortified. Jeanette, that was wrong. What he did in there was wrong. I know, I said. Are you going to talk to Patricia? I don't know yet. You should. You bring in more than half the people in that room combined. I thanked her and went back to my desk, where I sat for a long time staring at my screen, without really seeing it. I wasn't weighing whether to go to Patricia. I was thinking about my mother pulling a double at the packaging plant, coming home with her back aching, never once complaining because complaining didn't put food on the table. I wasn't going to complain either, but I also wasn't going to keep making myself invisible. That night, back at my apartment in the Heights, I did something I almost never do. Poured a glass of wine, sat on the balcony, and just breathed. Houston warm air, the kind that sits on your skin and doesn't leave. I thought about quitting. I won't pretend I didn't. I had the credentials, the track record. I could have walked into a dozen firms in the city and been hired the next day. But quitting felt like exactly what Craig wanted. For me to get frustrated, walk away, and let him absorb my accounts into his department while claiming credit for transitioning the international strategy, or whatever buzzword he'd land on. So I decided to stay. Not out of loyalty. Not out of stubbornness. I stayed because I knew something Craig didn't. Something about to upend the whole landscape of his comfortable little kingdom. For 4 months, I'd been in quiet negotiations with a company called Hanul Industries, a massive construction materials manufacturer based in Incheon, South Korea. The third largest supplier of industrial-grade steel composites in all of East Asia, with annual revenue in the billions, looking to expand its supplier relationships in the American market. I'd met their head of international procurement, a brilliant woman named Dr. Soo-Yeon Park, at a trade conference in Los Angeles that November. We clicked immediately. She appreciated that I spoke Korean. She appreciated even more that I understood Korean business culture. The emphasis on long-term relationships, the value placed on trust and consistency, decisions built through careful consensus rather than flashy pitches. We'd spent months going back and forth, emails, video calls. I'd even flown to Incheon on my own dime, a trip I never mentioned to Craig. because I knew he'd either try to hijack it or sabotage it just to prove a point. The potential Hanul contract was worth $2.4 million annually. Not a typo. It would more than double my division's output and represent a transformational account for Pinnacle Dynamics as a whole. And I was close enough to feel it. The morning after that meeting, I woke at 5 a.m. for a call with Dr. Park. 14 hours ahead, 7 p.m. her time. We talked for 45 minutes. She told me the procurement committee had reviewed my proposal and had one remaining concern: assurance that Pinnacle could scale delivery for large volume orders without sacrificing quality. I told her I'd personally guarantee the logistics coordination and would have a detailed scaling plan on her desk within 72 hours. She laughed. "Jeanette, you always deliver. That's why I want to work with you." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement exactly, more like certainty. The quiet kind that shows up once you know the work is done and about to speak for itself. The company luncheon was the next day, Wednesday. Every quarter, Pinnacle gathered the entire company in the main conference hall for a catered lunch and a state-of-the-business presentation. Patricia's idea. Her way of keeping everyone feeling connected. All 68 employees attended. Leadership sat at a long table up front. Craig loved the quarterly luncheon. It was another stage for him. He always had a segment on business development wins, slides, anecdotes, everything framed as a team effort, when really it was individual people grinding at their desks while he played golf. I got there early, wearing a navy blazer I'd bought with my first Pinnacle paycheck. It still fit perfectly, and took my usual seat near the back, since Craig had once informed me the front tables were reserved for core team members, whatever that meant. The luncheon opened normally. Patricia gave her remarks. The CFO talked margins. The operations director talked warehouse efficiency. Then Craig took the floor with his clicker and his slides. He covered the domestic accounts, a new client in Ohio, retention rates. Then he put up a slide showing total business development revenue, including my international numbers, with zero attribution. "As you can see," Craig said, gesturing at the screen, "business development has grown revenue 14% year over year, a direct result of the strategic initiatives our team has implemented." Our team. Strategic initiatives. Not one mention of the Asia-Pacific division. Not one mention of my name. I sat there eating my chicken Caesar and said nothing. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down. A Korean number I recognized instantly. Dr. Park's direct line. My pulse jumped. She never called unscheduled. She was meticulous about appointments and agendas. An unscheduled call meant something had shifted, and I had no idea which direction. I stood quietly and started for the door to take it in the hallway. Of course Craig noticed. "Jeanette." His voice carried across the room. Everyone turned. "We're in the middle of a company presentation. Whatever it is can wait." I stopped. Every eye in the room was on me. Patricia looked up from her table, curious. The phone kept buzzing in my hand. "It's the Hanul Industries account. From Korea. It might be time sensitive." Craig rolled his eyes, actually rolled them in front of the entire company. "I'm sure it can wait," he said dismissively. "Sit back down." And because I was tired, because I was done making myself small, because I'd spent 3 years building something extraordinary while being treated like it was nothing, because my mother once told me the only person who can make you invisible is yourself, I did something I'd never done before. I looked Craig dead in the eye and said, "Actually, I think everyone should hear this." Then I answered the call and put it on speaker. The room went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning. You could hear a fork touch a plate. "Jeanette." Dr. Park's voice came through clear and warm, speaking English with the slight formal precision of someone who'd learned it academically. "Dr. Park, hello. I'm here with my colleagues at Pinnacle Dynamics. You're on speaker." A brief pause, then she said something that changed the entire trajectory of my career, and ended Craig Whitford's. "Wonderful. Then everyone can hear the good news. The procurement committee met this afternoon, and we've unanimously approved the contract with Pinnacle. But Jeanette, there's more. Based on your proposal and your exceptional work over these past months, we've decided to triple the initial order volume. We're committing to the full East Asian distribution package. The revised contract value is $7.2 million over 3 years. $7.2 million over 3 years from a single client I'd cultivated entirely on my own, No help, no support, not so much as a mention in a quarterly slide deck. The room didn't gasp exactly. It was more like the air itself changed. People shifting in their seats. Someone near the middle tables whispered, "Oh my God." Dr. Park continued, "Jeanette, I want you to know this decision was made in large part because of your personal dedication and your understanding of our company's values. You flew to Incheon. You learned our processes. You spoke to our team in Korean and made them feel respected. That is rare and it is valuable. We look forward to a long and prosperous partnership." "Thank you, Dr. Park," I said, my voice steady even though my hands weren't. "I'm honored. We'll have the scaling documentation to you by Friday. I have no doubt. Good evening, Jeanette." The call ended. I lowered the phone. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then Patricia Thornton stood up from the head table. She wasn't a woman who showed emotion easily. She ran a $12 million company with the calm precision of a surgeon. But in that moment, she looked at me with something I can only describe as fierce respect. "Jeanette," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "would you come up here, please?" I walked to the front on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Every step echoed. Allison had her hand over her mouth. The CFO had already pulled out his phone doing math. Craig stood beside his slide presentation, clicker still in hand, his face gone the color of old concrete, gray crumbling like a man watching his own house burn from across the street. Patricia shook my hand. Not a quick professional shake, a real one, both hands looking me straight in the eye. "7.2 million, she said, loud enough for the whole room. That would make the Asia-Pacific division the single largest revenue generator in this company's history. She turned to the room. "I want everyone here to understand what just happened. Jeanette Calloway working alone with no additional headcount, no increased budget, and as I've recently been made aware, no raise," she paused on that word, looking directly at Craig, "has just secured a contract that represents a 60% increase in our total company revenue." The room started clapping. It began slowly, then built, people standing, someone in the back actually whooping. I stood there holding my phone, feeling my pulse in my throat, thinking about my mother's aluminum-sided house in Beaumont and that screen door that never quite latched. Craig tried to recover, stepping forward with his hands raised like he was about to say something about team effort and collaborative strategy. Patricia cut him off flat. "Craig, sit down. We'll be having a conversation after this." He sat, and didn't say another word for the rest of the luncheon. What followed was swift and unforgiving. That same afternoon, Patricia called me into her office, closed the door and sat across from me, not behind her desk, but in the chair beside mine like we were equals. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I hired you to build something, and then I didn't pay close enough attention to make sure you were supported. That's a failure of leadership, and it's mine." I appreciated that more than she probably realized, not the apology itself, but that she owned it without a single qualifier, no but, no excuse. She told me that, effective immediately, I'd receive a 35% raise, retroactive to the start of the quarter. I'd also be promoted to Director of International Business Development, a title putting me on equal footing with Craig in the org chart. I'd have budget authority to hire a team of 3, and I'd report directly to Patricia, not to Craig. Then she told me what would happen to Craig. He wasn't fired that day. Patricia knew immediately terminating him would create chaos in domestic accounts. But he was placed on a performance improvement plan, which at that level is essentially a countdown clock. His authority over international accounts was stripped entirely. His annual bonus was frozen pending a review of his management practices, particularly his decision to exclude me from the department-wide raise. Within 2 months, Craig Whitford resigned. The official story was that he was pursuing other opportunities. The real story, as I later learned from Allison, was that the CFO had specifically told Craig my accounts qualified me for the raise, and Craig had personally overridden that recommendation. He hadn't just overlooked me. He'd actively worked to deny me the raise. When Patricia found that out, whatever patience she had left evaporated. Craig was given a choice between a quiet exit and a formal investigation into his conduct. He chose the door. I didn't celebrate his departure. There was nothing to celebrate there. A man let his insecurity consume his judgment, and it cost him his career. That's not a victory. That's a cautionary tale. What I did celebrate was the Hanul Industries kickoff meeting. 3 weeks after the luncheon, Dr. Park flew to Houston with 2 members of her procurement team. We held it at Pinnacle's offices, and Patricia insisted on attending in person. Dr. Park brought gifts, as is customary in Korean business culture. Beautiful celadone teacups for Patricia and the leadership team, and for me, a framed piece of calligraphy. I asked what it said. She smiled and told me it was a Korean proverb. A burden known to everyone is carried by no one, but a burden carried quietly reveals the true strength of the one carrying it. I hung it in my new office, my actual office, with my name on the door. The first year of the Hanul partnership blew past every projection. That initial tripled order led to more requests as their construction projects across Southeast Asia picked up speed. By the end of the fiscal year, that single account had generated $2.9 million, even higher than Dr. Park's original estimate. I built my team. Victor Padilla, a logistics coordinator with 15 years of supply chain experience who spoke Mandarin. Keiko Watanabe, a business analyst who'd spent a decade in Tokyo and understood Asian market dynamics better than almost anyone I'd ever met. And Tomas Reyes, a 26-year-old account manager from San Antonio, hungry, sharp, reminding me of myself at that age, someone with big ambitions and no one yet telling him they were possible. I made sure every one of them was paid fairly from day one. Non negotiable. I told Patricia, I will never run a team where someone has to wonder if their work is valued. Either we pay people what they're worth, or we don't ask them to work here. She agreed without hesitation. By the end of my second year as director, the Asia-Pacific division had 6 active accounts across South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, pulling in $4.8 million annually. We weren't the experimental division anymore. We were the engine. Patricia presented the numbers at the annual board meeting and told the board the international division was the single most important growth story in the company's history. She credited me by name. She credited every member of my team by name. I sat in that boardroom in a seat at the front table, thinking about Craig Whitford's words, "Your results just aren't worth it," and how certain he'd sounded, how sure he was he could keep me boxed in a corner indefinitely. He was wrong. Not because I proved him wrong. He was wrong because the work proved him wrong. I just did the work. There's a lesson in this, and it's not the one people usually pull from stories like mine. It isn't that the good guy always wins, or that karma comes for the bad guys eventually. The lesson is simpler and harder. There will always be people who try to shrink you, who look at what you've built and find ways to make it smaller, who deny your value not because they can't see it, but because your value threatens theirs. And when that happens, you get a choice. You can spend your energy fighting them, arguing with them, trying to force them to see what's plainly in front of their face. Or you can put your head down, do the work, and trust that excellence makes its own argument. I chose the work. I'll always choose the work. My mother called the night after the luncheon. Somehow, I still don't know how, probably my brother, who I'd texted in a daze right after the call with Dr. Park, she'd already heard. She didn't say congratulations. That wasn't her style. What she said was, "Jeanette Marie Calloway, I knew you were going to be something special the day you came home from school speaking Spanish to the dog." I laughed so hard I cried. Then she said, "Your daddy missed out on knowing you. That's his loss. And anyone who can't see what you're worth, that's their loss too." I'm still at Pinnacle Dynamics. The international division now has 8 employees and 12 active accounts. Last quarter, we crossed the $10 million revenue mark. Patricia started talking about spinning the division off into its own subsidiary, with me as president. I still have that calligraphy from Dr. Park hanging on my wall. I read it every morning before I start my day. A burden carried quietly reveals the strength of the one who carries it. But I've added my own line underneath, on a sticky note pressed to the bottom of the frame in my own handwriting. And when the time comes, let the work speak. It has a louder voice than any of them,